Good afternoon and welcome to the Washington Report with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington. Let's get to it. The House and Senate will return today and stay in session through Thursday. This week in the House will return Monday with the first vote set for 6:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to consider 15 bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday, and for the remainder of the week, the House is scheduled to consider 7 more bills under suspension of the rules. Then the House will consider 4 bills pursuant to a rule. They are H.R. 1181, the Protecting Privacy in Purchases Act, H.R. 139, the Sunshine Protection Act of 2025, H.R. 8595, the National Security, State Department, and Related Agencies Appropriations Act of 2026, and H.R. 9237, the Take Care of America's Veterans Act. We'll talk more about this in a moment. This week in the Senate will return on Monday with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on the confirmation of Arthur Robert Jones to serve as a United States District Judge for the Southern District of Texas. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll see a vote to confirm Matthew A. Schwartz to serve as a United States Circuit Judge for the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And then the Senate will take up the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2027. And don't be surprised if you see the Senate take up its version of the annual National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. Now let's talk about Lindsey Graham. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, who replaced Strom Thurmond in the United States Senate in 2003, died Saturday evening, apparently of an aortic rupture, according to initial reports from the Washington, D.C. Medical Examiner. He was 71 and had just returned from a trip to Ukraine, which has already led to speculation that he may have been murdered by agents of Vladimir Putin, who have experience in murdering Putin opponents and making it look like a heart attack. You'll find eulogies and remembrances elsewhere. We're going to talk for a moment about the process to replace him in the Senate and what his loss means to the Senate. Governor Henry McMaster, a Republican, will make a temporary appointment to fill out the rest of the current term, which ends at the beginning of January. His office announced earlier today that he would make an announcement at 4 p.m. this afternoon. To fill the full 6-year term to which Graham had been nominated, state Republicans will hold a special primary election on August 11. If no candidate receives a majority of the vote, there will be a runoff 2 weeks later on August 25. Speaker Johnson would, for obvious reasons, prefer that Governor McMaster look elsewhere than the South Carolina House delegation to choose the interim appointee. The Speaker cannot afford to lose a member of the South Carolina delegation. He's only got a 2-vote majority as is, and he doesn't want to be left with a 1-vote majority until such time as a special election could be held to fill that House vacancy. Congresswoman Nancy Mace and Congressman Ralph Norman, both of whom ran for the Republican nomination for governor but lost, are said to be eyeing the special primary election. So may be Lieutenant Governor Pam Evett, who also ran for the GOP nomination for governor but lost. And Congressman Bill Timmons and Russell Fry are also reported to be considering it. It's easy to see why winning a seat representing South Carolina in the United States Senate could be attractive to a politician. Previous incumbents have a habit of holding a seat in the Senate for a long time. Graham himself was running to win his 5th term, and the man he replaced held the seat for 8 terms, 48 years, from 1955 to 2003. The man who served most of that man's term as the state's junior senator held the seat for 38 years, from 1966 to 2005, all but 2 years of which he served as the state's junior senator, earning him a record as the longest-serving junior senator in the history of the Senate. Graham's death will also create a vacancy at the top of the Senate Budget Committee. Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson is next in line to chair the committee. He has a very different view of defense spending than did Graham and is far more hawkish on the deficit and the debt. So, given the Trump administration's determination to increase defense spending by 50% and Johnson's dim view of deficit spending, budget deliberations in the Senate could take a turn if Johnson gets the nod. Graham was slated to be the top Republican on the Judiciary Committee next year because current Chairman Chuck Grassley of Iowa is term limited. Utah Senator Mike Lee is next in line in seniority, along with Texas Senator Ted Cruz and Missouri Senator Josh Hawley. Graham was also the chairman of the State Foreign Operations Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, and it's not clear who's going to take that spot. Obviously, his spot on the Appropriations Committee will be a plum for someone. Now let's talk about the House floor and the Save America Act. The House has not been able to hold regular floor votes on bills pursuant to a rule since June. That's because the last 2 weeks they were in session, Florida Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna refused to vote for the House leadership-approved rules to get bills to the floor. She did so, she said, as a means to pressure the Senate to pass the Save America Act. How she thinks stopping action in the House is going to convince about 10 or 12 Senate Democrats to change their minds and vote for the Save America Act is beyond me. But that's her thinking. So twice now, in 2 successive weeks before the 4th of July recess, she led a small band of GOP members to cross party lines and vote with House Democrats against a rule to govern floor consideration of various legislation. And the House leadership responded by sending lawmakers home. So now they're back, and they have no reason to believe she's changed her mind or her tactics. In fact, she said so, quote, "Nothing right now has changed for me," she told Punchbowl News on Friday morning. Quote, "It's time to smoke out some rats in the Senate," unquote. But they've only got 8 legislative days left before the long August recess begins, and they've only got 24 legislative days left on the schedule before the election. And they've got bills to move before that happens. So clearly, they need an inducement, some way to entice her into dropping her resistance to voting for a rule without the Save America Act passing the Senate. Enter H.R. 139, the Sunshine Protection Act of 2025. This is a bill to do away with daylight savings time and leave the country in standard time all the time. It would add daylight hours at the end of the day. Consequently, it is very popular in Florida, which relies on the tourism and golfing industries. It's also very popular with President Trump, a resident of Florida who wants so much to see the bill passed that he's called members of Congress to lobby them personally on the bill. House GOP leaders have already included the bill as part of the surface transportation reauthorization measure that's pending consideration by the full House, but now they've stripped it out to send it to the floor as a standalone so they can package it with other bills on which they want to take action. By slipping it into this package and then sending the package to the Rules Committee, House GOP leaders are forcing her to choose. She can have the bill she wants, wrapped up with several others in a package that would allow each of them to get their own individual floor vote, but only if she drops her resistance to voting for rules. Or she can maintain her opposition to voting for rules until the Senate passes the Save America Act, which would mean the House wouldn't pass anything under a rule between now and the end of the Congress because Senate Democrats are just as determined as she is on the matter, and they have absolutely no reason to respond favorably to her tactic. Congresswoman Luna may have been the one who started the fire, but she's not the only one carrying a torch these days. On Friday, Texas Republican Lance Gooden announced that Republicans must add the Save America Act, quote, to every piece of legislation until we secure our elections once and for all, unquote. And her tactic showed another group of conservatives in the House a way to pressure the leadership on another key issue, immigration enforcement. Several of them, including Texas Republican Chip Roy, are demanding that Speaker Johnson live up to what they say is a promise he made to hold a vote on the old H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act. They've threatened that they, too, will not vote for a rule until their demands are met to their satisfaction. The Speaker has asked President Trump for help in unsticking the floor. The administration is sending Vice President J.D. Vance to the Hill tomorrow to meet with House Republicans in a meeting of the House Republican Conference. So, we'll find out tomorrow when the House votes on the rule to govern floor consideration of several bills, including the Sunshine Protection Act, what the outlook looks like for the coming weeks. Now let's talk about Reconciliation 3.0. Speaker Johnson continues to believe the House can move a third reconciliation bill through the chamber. Interested committee chairmen and stakeholders held a conference call last Wednesday but did not come to agreement. They holed up at Camp David over the weekend, continuing to try to come to an agreement on what would be included in a third reconciliation bill, along with the president's request for a $350 billion plus-up for defense spending and the Save America Act. They were still there this morning trying to work it out because the Speaker actually wants a budget resolution to be reported out of committee later this week. I don't have to tell you, that's an incredibly ambitious schedule. We anticipate it will include significant spending cuts to woo conservatives in the form of a tax on fraud. The spending cuts are going to be tough to finesse. They've got to be large enough to mollify the deficit hawks, and yet small enough not to lose votes from the moderates who are facing difficult re-election campaigns in the fall who don't want to be tagged as voting for spending cuts. And don't forget the $67 billion supplemental funding request for the Pentagon to pay for the Iran war. It'll be interesting to see if either the $350 billion reconciliation funding request or the $67 billion supplemental funding request gets bigger now that President Trump has declared the ceasefire over and the significant shooting has begun again. Now let's talk about the Department of Justice warning states about non-citizen voting. On Tuesday of last week, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Harmeet Dillon sent a letter to the top election official in each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia, reminding them of the various federal laws regarding election integrity and non-citizen voting, and reminding them of their responsibilities to enforce those laws and the penalties for those who don't, and who willfully and knowingly allow non-citizens to vote. Some of them did not like it, and they blew a gasket. Arizona's Secretary of State called the letter insulting. Colorado's Secretary of State called it a thinly veiled attempt to intimidate election officials. And Oregon's Secretary of State said he would not be intimidated by political threats. This letter reminded state election officers of their obligations under federal law to ensure the integrity of their state's election processes by enforcing laws against non-citizens registering and or voting in federal elections, and reminding the election officers that the laws in question include criminal penalties for both the non-citizens who break the law and any election official who knowingly allows them to do so. In the letter, dated July 7, Dillon writes that, quote, "This letter serves as a notice of the federal laws applicable to state and local election officials to ensure free, fair, and transparent elections," unquote. The letter includes with it a memorandum entitled, quote, "Federal Law Requirements for State and Local Election Officials," unquote, which, quote, outlines various responsibilities for state and local election officials under federal law and the potential criminal penalties for those who fail to carry out their duties, unquote. For several paragraphs thereafter, the letter details many of the federal laws regarding state-level election integrity requirements, including, for instance, a prohibition against, quote, knowingly retaining non-citizens on the state's state voter registration list, the SVRL, and sending such individuals ballots and then counting such ballots, unquote. The letter concludes with an offer and a request, quote, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division would like to assist your state in complying with these federal laws, end quote, she writes, before adding, quote, please respond to this letter within 5 days, informing us how the state intends to ensure it is complying with these federal laws, both at the state and the local level, and how the department can assist in those efforts, unquote. What is it about this letter that has so upset state election officials? I think it's clearly the latter part of the reminder, the information regarding criminal penalties for election officials who knowingly aid in the breaking of the law. That's got them so worked up. They just don't like being told that there's a new sheriff in town who's actually going to be enforcing federal law sternly, including against top state-level government officials. The point of election integrity statutes isn't to make it easier to investigate, locate, arrest, prosecute, and then incarcerate those who violate those laws after the laws have already been broken. It's to prevent the laws from being violated in the first place. The federal government has a job to do, and so do the states. And part of the job requires working together to ensure election integrity. Now let's talk nominations. 3 of President Trump's nominees for key positions in the government will get their confirmation hearings in the relevant committees of jurisdiction this week. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who's been nominated to serve in the post permanently, will get his hearing in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee on Wednesday. Last week, he got a letter of support signed by 4 former chiefs of staff of the Department of Justice, which you can find in the suggested reading. Jay Clayton, who now serves the administration as the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, but has been nominated to serve as Director of National Intelligence, will go before the Senate Intelligence Committee on Wednesday. Acting Labor Secretary Keith Sonderling, who's been nominated to take the Labor Secretary slot permanently, goes before the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee Thursday morning. And that's our Washington report for this week. If you've got any questions or comments, please drop us a line at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. If you want me to answer a question during the broadcast, just put "for broadcast" in the subject line. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Washington Report. Same time, same channel. Until then, be well and be active.